I went from 1400 to 2100 in just 2 months, and I'm gonna tell you how I did it, so you can do the same thing. The only thing I focused on were the weaknesses. A weakness is a square that is attacked more times than it is defended. And with that in mind, let's go into the first game. In the first game, we're playing a 1756. I have the black pieces, and my opponent goes pawn to e4. Of course, as always, I go pawn to c5, the Sicilian defense, and he goes pawn to c3. This is the Alpine variation. He wants to take some space in the center, so of course, first I go pawn to d5, taking space in the center myself. He takes a pawn, I take with the queen, and knight to f3, developing his pieces. I go pawn to e6. I know the bishop is inside of the pawn chain, but the idea is to go pawn to b6 and develop the bishop via b7 or maybe via a6. Now, he gives me a check. I can cover 3 different ways, with bishop, with the knight, or with the knight via c6. I chose knight to c6. He castles, I develop my pieces, I want to castle as well, but he attacks my queen first. Now I bring the queen back to d6, he goes knight to c3, developing his pieces. I develop my bishop to castle next, and he goes pawn to d4. So first I take the pawn, he takes back with the knight, and notice something, that is a weakness. That is attacked 2 times and only defended once. The problem is, this knight is pinned, so I can't even move it. So first I go bishop to d7, unpinning my knight on c6. He goes bishop to g5, and that is a blunder. I hope you see why. Remember what I just told you 10 seconds ago? This knight is not pinned anymore. So now I can use it. Now this is actually attacked 2 times. So I just take it with the queen, he takes back, and I take back with the knight, and we are up a full piece. Now he takes the knight on f6, I take back with the bishop, he takes on d7, I take with the king, and rook to d1, and oh, am I losing my knight? Nope, because it is defended by the bishop on f6. So I very slowly bring the rook to d8. He attacks the defender of the knight. He attacks the bishop on f6. So I just bring my king out of danger. Knight to c5, now attacking the pawn on b7. I don't want to be passive. I don't want to defend that pawn. I attack the rook on a1 with my knight. He takes the pawn on b7. I take the rook on a1, and my opponent resigned. He's down a full piece. He takes the rook on d8, I take back, and now he takes the knight on a1, and look at this, I have a bishop, he doesn't have a bishop, this is game over. Very easy win against a 1700, and now we jump into the second game. And now in this second game, I'm playing a 1900. This is the first time in this rapid run that I'm playing a 1900, so I have to be really sharp, really careful, but very active at the same time. So I have the white pieces now. Of course, I open up with d4 and pawn to c4. My opponent goes with the king's Indian defense. He wants to develop the bishop via g7, he wants to castle and throw an attack in the center. Of course, I just go with my go-to setup, develop my knight, develop the other knight, I want to castle. So that's exactly what I do, pawn to a6, pawn to h3. I don't want this bishop to pin this beautiful knight right here. So he goes rook to e8 with the obvious idea of pushing the pawn on e5. I want to develop the bishop via b2 or maybe via a3. He goes pawn to e5. I go d5, attacking the knight, he goes back to b8. That was the initial square of the knight. I just developed my bishop, he goes knight to d7, he wants to go knight to c5 next. I go pawn to e4, stopping the e4 from his side, and now he goes pawn to a5. I go pawn a3, I want to break with pawn to b4, but first he goes knight c5. This is now a weakness, attacked by the knight on c5 and the knight on f6. So of course I go queen to c2, and now it is defended 2 times as well, so I don't have to worry about that anymore. Now he goes knight to h5 with the idea of going knight to f4, molesting the bishop on e2. However, I don't really care about that. I have to be active, I can't stay passive, so I go pawn to b4, attacking his knight first. He goes pawn takes b4, I take on b4 again, and he goes knight to a6. And this is a blunder. Of course, I hope you already saw that. But I was like calculating for 40 seconds here. I go pawn to b5. Of course, he has to move the knight now, and the rook will be undefended, so I will take it. But I was calculating maybe knight b4, which attacks my queen first. Knight b4, queen b3, then he takes on e1, I take with the rook. It was a line that ended up with the knight being trapped. At the end, I just went pawn to b5, he went knight c5, I took the rook, and now I am up a full rook. Queen to e7, getting the queen out of the pin from the rook, and now I go knight to h2. I know, that looks like a very confusing move. I'm moving my knight backwards, but the idea is to go bishop to g4 once he attacks me. Now I can go bishop g4, and when he takes me, I can just take back with the knight. That's what happened in the game. He takes on g4, but be careful, before you take the bishop, the rook is hanging. So just get rid of the rook by trading the rooks on e8. When he takes back with the queen, now we can take the bishop on g4. Now he attacks my knight. I go back to h2 because I want to get my knight to f3. That's a way better square. Now he gets a queen to e7, knight to f3, pawn to g5. I can't take it because it is defended by the queen. And now I'm asking for some exchanges. I want to get rid of all the pieces because I am up in material. So he allows me to. I take the knight on f4, he takes back with the queen. I attack the queen, he takes on e4, I take back. When he takes back with the knight, I just take the pawn on g5, which is defended by the bishop, so he can't take that, and he resigned the game. This game got me a lot of rating because of course this guy is 1900, which was like 50 points ahead of my rating at the time. So I was pretty excited, but still pretty far from 2100, so we have to keep playing. And now we move on to the third game. And now in the third game, we have the black pieces again. My opponent goes pawn to d4, I go pawn d5, and we have a queen's gambit declined. We both develop our pieces. He goes bishop to f4, which of course reminds me a lot of the London system kind of structures. Bishop on f4, I go bishop d6, which is what I always do against the London system. He goes back with the bishop to d2, which is kind of a weird move. He moved the bishop to f4, then he went backwards, so he just wasted a tempo really. Now, I take the pawn on c4, he goes pawn to e4, of course with the idea of but forking my bishop and my knight. So I go pawn to e5 first, he goes pawn d5, that's good. I castle, he takes the pawn on c4, I go pawn to a6 because I want to go pawn to b5 and develop the bishop via b7. Now pawn to a3, knight d7, developing my pieces. He wants to castle. I go knight to c5, putting pressure on the pawn on e4. He's attacked now 2 times and only defended once. My opponent goes queen to c2, now defending the bishop, not the bishop, the pawn enough times. And now I go pawn to b5, getting 1 tempo on the bishop. He moves back and bishop b7. I know it doesn't look like a great idea. This bishop is not really pointing at anything, but my plan is to go pawn to c6 and just break the center right here, which was kind of what happened in the game. He goes pawn to b4, attacking my knight first. I go back with the knight. Now my opponent went bishop to g5, and notice something about this bishop. First it went to f4, then it went back to d2, and now it went to g5. It has moved the bishop 3 times, and you can only have moved it once to g5. So he's just giving me free tempos, really. Now I go rook to c8, putting the rook on an x-ray with the queen, in case I want to open up this file, which is exactly what I'm planning on doing. Now he goes pawn to f4, attacking I don't know what. If you take this, that would be lovely. I can get my bishop on a way better square, you know, putting pressure on this rook, defending this knight. So f4 is kind of a good move for me. I go pawn to c6. Of course, I want to open the c file so I can attack the queen. He goes rook to d1, putting pressure now on my queen if things open up around here. Now I take the pawn on d5, he takes back with the bishop, I take with the bishop, takes with the rook. It looks like the rook is hanging, but not really because this knight is pinned. So first I get my queen out of the pin, putting pressure on the knight on c3. Now putting pressure on this rook as well. But now he moves the rook out of danger, great. Now I take the pawn on f4 because I want to put the bishop on a better square, putting a lot more pressure on the knight on c3. He castles now, bishop to e5. He defends the knight again, and now I take the knight on c3. He takes back with the knight, and notice that the knight is attacked 2 times and it is defended also 2 times. But still, I take the knight on c3. I know this looks like a blunder. He can just take my queen 2 times, really, and it looks like I'm losing a piece. Look at this final position. But I have knight takes e4, and this is what I calculated, with a triple fork. Now he takes the knight on d7, I take the rook, and now I am up 2 pawns. But this is not what happened in the game. Instead, my opponent went bishop takes f6, which is a blunder, because now I can go queen takes c2. He takes back, I take the rook, he takes back, and then I take the bishop on f6. So this is what happened. I started taking the knight on c3, and I ended taking the bishop on f6. So I started taking a piece, and I ended taking a piece. Therefore, I am up a piece. Let me put another example. If I take one of your pieces, and then you take one of my pieces, then I started and you ended. Therefore, we are equal in material. But if I start taking one of your pieces and I end taking one of your pieces, I'm up in material, which is what happened here. I have a knight, you don't have a knight, so I am up 1 full piece. Now he goes pawn to e5, attacking my knight. I get my knight out of danger. He attacks the pawn on a6. I just defended with the rook. I don't want to lose that pawn. Now attacks the knight on d5. I just get my knight out of danger, take the pawn on g3, giving my king a little bit of space so I don't fall for any background checkmate. Attacks the knight. Now I'm attacking both the rook and this pawn. He defends the pawn, but now this pawn is falling as well. I just take it, attacking the rook, go back with the knight to put pressure on this pawn. He gets the king closer, I get my rook closer. And now this is just a matter of maneuvering the knight just a little bit. Now he attacks the pawn on a6. I defend it with the rook. If you take my rook, it is defended by the knight. and after rook to c7, my opponent resigned the game. Really interesting games, taking advantage of my opponent's weaknesses, and here's the best part. You can do the same thing and you will gain a lot of rating. Believe me, it's way easier than learning a lot of opening theory, reading 40 books per day. You can just focus on the weaknesses, and you will see a tremendous difference. Make sure you subscribe and turn on the notifications, and I will see you in the next game.